Start the presentation. So first, I just want to say good morning and just thank you to everyone here. My name is Kalen Gillum, and I'm a conservation intern over at Pocahontas State Park. And this morning, I'm joined by two of my colleagues who I'll let introduce themselves really quickly.
Good morning. My name is Bobby Todd, and I am a AmeriCorps Park Operations Track member, and I'm serving at Pocahontas State Park. And welcome. Good morning. I would like to remind everyone to mute themselves as we proceed with the presentation.
And I am Ethan Howes. I am one of the park interpreters and I guess acting curator at the Civilian Conservation Corps Museum that's located within the park. And if you don't know about the Civilian Conservation Corps, they actually help construct Pocahontas State Park. And so the buildings that we're talking about today, or the Group Camp 7, was constructed by the Civilian Conservation Corps.
So thank you. And I just want to start by saying, thank you to all of you for taking some time out of your Saturday morning just to learn a bit more about what we've been able to uncover about the Group Camp 7 site here at the park. And just, thank you for taking a moment to learn about our park's history. Now, for those of you who aren't aware, Ranger Ethan and I actually did a Zoom last month in February that broadly talked about the history of Pocahontas State Park and the context in which Group Camp 7 fit into that. We did record that Zoom, and if anyone is interested after this presentation, we can get that link to the recorded Zoom put in the chat. That way you guys can go check it out. And something I want to make clear is that this presentation will be taking a deeper look at the history of some of the organizations that we see involved through the history of Group Camp 7, as well as those pioneers who paved the way for opportunities like this to happen in the first place. Now, when looking at Group Camp 7, before we get into who was utilizing the site, it's important to get an understanding of how this site came to be in the first place. So as Ethan touched on a few moments ago, Group Camp 7 was built in the 1930s by the Civilian Conservation Corps. And the camp site was completed in 1939. And in that same year, it was opened and designated to be used by African Americans during that time period. And as we go along and observe the history of Group Camp 7, we continue to see African Americans use this site even after segregation has ended. Now, for some of you who tuned into that first Zoom, you'll know that in that I stated that when Group Camp 7 opened, it was one of two state-owned sites at the time that allowed African Americans to recreate in spaces like this. And that information actually wasn't accurate. When the site first opened, it was still owned by the federal government. And we didn't see that transition to being a state-owned site until later on in 1946. Now, when it was open, we did see that the federal government was leasing this site out primarily to local church groups in the state of Virginia. Now, we didn't see anything that indicated individuals or families or things of that nature leasing the site, but we do know for sure that it was mainly local church organizations here that were utilizing the Group Camp 7 site. So when looking at who was utilizing the site, this is a list of some of the organizations and camps we've been able to uncover while telling this story. And the two first groups we actually see with a hand in that early story of Group Camp 7 are the YWCA and the Girl Scouts of Richmond. And does anyone know what the YWCA stands for and would like to place that in the chat for those who may not know? Just really briefly. Yes, thank you, Bobby. So the YWCA stands for the Young Women's Christian Association. And we see them and the Girl Scouts having this kind of arrangement at the Group Camp 7 site that I'll get into in a few moments. But after looking at them, we also see the emergence of Camp Wahala, which was a camp that the YWCA held a few years after at the Group Camp 7 site. In addition to that, we also see Camp Kerry, which has really been the camp we've been able to tell the most information about and find the most on. Lots of resources from newspapers here in the state of Virginia and local universities. And the last camp that I'll talk about during my presentation is Camp H.N. Johnson. And I know it says possibly beside it. And that's because that camp is a bit of a mystery. And I'll explain more later on in the presentation. Now, when looking at the history of the YWCA and Girl Scouts, most of what we've been able to find were in newspaper articles like this one here from the New Journal and Guide. And I also ask that you excuse some of the language used because it is an article from the 1930s and it will have language in there fit into that time period. But if you read through the article, you can see that when the YWCA and Girl Scouts were there, this helps give a lot of insight into that. So we see that in 1939, they did have about 45 African-American girls come out to the site. And although it doesn't explicitly state Group Camp 7 or Camp Number 7, just based off of what is mentioned here in that first paragraph, we can tell that it was there when they reference a new recreational camp for African-Americans in the Swift Creek recreational area, which is what that part of the park was known as back then during that time. Now, if you continue on to this second paragraph that starts with the Y, that paragraph gives some insight into a bit of the arrangement between these two organizations at Group Camp 7. So you'll see that it says the Y would utilize the site for about 3 weeks, after which the Girl Scouts of Richmond would come in and they would continue to utilize the site for 3 weeks as well. And then further down, it also gives us some insight into some of the amenities of the camp. You see it says that they had 2 units of 8 cabins that were able to accommodate about 48 campers, as well as 10 leaders and additional, kitchen staff and other staff members that you would need to operate a camp like this. And then further down, of course, again, there's a reference to the location. It says that the camp was located off of Woodpecker Road, which for those who aren't familiar with the park, Woodpecker Road runs along the southern end of the park. And along it, there's a parking lot that gives access to Otter Lake Loop, which is a trail that is still used today and it goes around the Group Camp 7 site. So having that reference there just further helps us see that it was at Group Camp 7. And we do have other resources aside from this that tells us for sure that these organizations were there. But again, this is kind of what we see when we're looking at that early story of Group Camp 7. Now, a few years after, in 1941, we also see the YWCA again at Group Camp 7 with their camp called Camp Wahala. This camp, it's one that I haven't been able to find a ton of information on. And we're still trying to uncover and learn more about the YWCA and their involvement with Group Camp 7. But most of what I've been able to find on Camp Wahala are similar to the article that I have here, which references the Camp Number 7 site in the Swift Creek recreational area. And from this article, we're also able to tell how long this camp was at the site in the year 1941, just based off this last sentence here in that first paragraph, where it points out that they were utilizing Group Camp 7 for 2 periods of 2 weeks, and that started July 3rd in 1941. And basically what we're able to take away from that is, one, that they were there for a total of 4 weeks, and it helps give insight into how long some of these camps were really utilizing the site. But aside from that, something that I found to be really interesting when reading through articles similar to this about Camp Wahala was the fact that they had apparently been receiving a lot of praise and things of that sort from the federal government just because of the things that they were able to accomplish with the girls that would come out to their camps. and just for the manner in which they did care for some of the girls that came out. But that pretty much concludes a bit of what we've been able to find so far on the YWCA and the Girl Scouts. And again, we're still trying to uncover and learn more each day. Now, after the YWCA and Girl Scouts, the next camp we came across in that story was Camp Kerry, and their beginning at Group Camp 7 is also intertwined with the YWCA and the Girl Scouts as well. But before I touch on that, we have to first understand how Camp Kerry came about. And then this kind of predates 1939 when the Group Camp 7 site opened. Now, during this time, we have the Women's Missionary Union of Virginia, which was a white Christian group at the time. And prior to 1939, they had already had an interracial department within their organization that would partner with local Black churches in Virginia just to carry out different programming, different like local camps that would be hosted at these churches. And during this period, they knew that they wanted to do another camp, just wasn't sure, what it would be called or where it would be located. And eventually, they partnered with the Baptist General Convention of Virginia, which was a Black Christian group at that time, and they came together and decided on the Camp Kerry name, just based off of some pioneers that were important, not just to the Baptist and missionary community, but the Black community as well. Now, after coming together and deciding on the Camp Kerry name, they began looking around for a site that would be suitable enough to host this camp, and they eventually landed on Group Camp 7. Now, something to keep in mind during this time period is that, while they're looking at Group Camp 7, we already have the YWCA and Girl Scouts leasing this site from the federal government. So those involved with Camp Kerry actually had to sublease the facilities from these two organizations. And when they did that, they also rented things like beds, kitchen equipment, dining equipment, just, the overall basic things you would need to help operate a camp. And this could be an indicator that maybe the facilities that they had there weren't fully furnished because this was still pretty early on and when they opened, or it could be an indicator that they might have never been fully furnished or had all the things that they needed in there. But once they secured that agreement, they leased the site from those two organizations for the first week of June in 1939. And this week-long session that they held at Group Camp 7 was basically meant to be looked at as an experiment, if you will. If it goes good, then that's great. But if it doesn't, it's not like the organization as a whole had a lot invested at the Group Camp 7 site. So with that, they went through that first week-long session, and it was very popular, very successful. And the following year in 1940, they actually wanted to do a 2-week-long session, and they went ahead and secured a lease directly from the federal government to cover this 2-week-long period. And once they did that, they started accepting applications for that session, and the demand to join Camp Kerry was actually overwhelming. They actually had to start turning down applications just for the simple fact that the facilities at Group Camp 7 couldn't handle the amount of people that wanted to be there and wanted to be present during that time. Now, something that I didn't mention earlier that I just want to throw in too, in case anyone's wondering, is that Camp Kerry was a camp, again, for girls from Baptist churches across the state of Virginia. And the camp pretty much catered to girls ages 10 to 15, and what they considered young women, which started 15 up to 25. So those are the age groups that we're working with up in here. Now, while they're doing this and preparing for this second session and they're getting this high demand, they're starting to recognize that, hey, like we might really have something here, and that, people really do want these kinds of opportunities. So with that, they actually went on to pursue a months-long lease from the federal government, but something happened between 1941 and 1945 that kind of put a halt in those plans. During that time, we actually had World War II going on, and for some reason that limited them to only being able to operate about 2 weeks each year at the Group Camp 7 site. And that could have been, the site was still federally owned within this time period. So that could have been that, resources and staff and attention were focused more on war efforts and not so much on managing this natural space that they had. But that's just kind of where they were with Group Camp 7 between 1941 and 1945. Now, with that, we actually see something really nice happen between Camp Kerry and the Girl Scouts. It was really great. The Girl Scouts in about 1946, they were actually willing to donate a week's worth of their time at the Group Camp 7 site to Camp Kerry to allow them to carry on their programming for a total of 3 weeks versus the 2 that they had already been operating in for the past few years. Now, with that, in 1946, this is also the year where, again, we're seeing that transition from the Group Camp 7 site being state-owned to being, from being federally owned, to being state-owned. And that transition of power actually didn't affect Camp Kerry. They were still able to operate in the same capacity that they did prior to this, and everything was fine. Now, after that transition, a few years pass and we reach 1951. And then this year we see the administrative committee for Camp Kerry actually reach an agreement with the state agency that allowed them to utilize the Group Camp 7 site for a total of 4 weeks. And if you check the progression over time, you see that originally Camp Kerry started out with a 1 week long session. Then, they switched over to 2, then to 3, and then we see them kind of max out at 4 weeks in 1951. And from there, we see the camp carry on utilizing the Group Camp 7 site through the 50s up into the 60s, where it appears it may have ended in the year 1966. And just some information about Camp Kerry as a whole. When girls would come here, being that it was operated by a few religious organizations, girls did do Bible study. They would learn about missionaries and missionary work, while also participating in things like health education, making handcrafts and things of that nature. And those activities were mainly carried out in the morning or the earlier half of the day. And then evenings at Camp Kerry would be for, all the fun things kids look forward to when they come out to these camps. Just, swimming, having fun with friends, and most importantly, enjoying an opportunity to recreate in a space that, that this thing wasn't widely available during that time. It wasn't very common to see these kinds of sites. But during my research of Camp Kerry, there were several figures that were pointed out to myself and others who helped with research. And some of the organizations that we reached out to pointed out some of these figures as well. And the first one is Mrs. Lena Esme, who actually served as the first and only camp director for Camp Kerry. And she served in that position for 27 years, which basically spanned the life of the camp. Now, prior to this, she was also a president of the Women's Baptist Missionary and Educational Association. So prior to being camp director, she was no stranger to being in these leadership positions and really working to make a change and get things done. And something that I found interesting about her through my research was that she was the only staff member to never miss a single week at camp. And when you hear that and think about the fact that she served for 27 years, that's a lot of dedication to, the camp, to creating these opportunities and touching many lives of girls and young women who came out to the camp. And from what I was able to learn through my research, people who had a chance to work with Miss Smith actually attributed a lot of the success of Camp Kerry to her. I've read that she was described as a rare genius during that time. And people who were at Camp Kerry believed that if she wasn't the camp director or if she wasn't there and present, they might not have had the reach that they had. They might not have had the major success where they're having to turn down applications simply because they don't have the space to meet this demand and this desire. And I just definitely wanted to highlight Mrs. Lena S. Smith, as well as Camp Kerry, the YWCA, and Girl Scouts, in honor of Women's History Month, because what we're seeing here is these groups of women who are truly trailblazing and being pioneers. And again, a lot of these opportunities weren't widely available during that time. And it's very important to note that interracial partnership in the 1930s, where racial tensions are very high. Now, these next two gentlemen I'll be talking about, they're actually pioneers who are important to, one of them is very important to not just the Black community, but the Baptist missionary community, and another is also very important to the missionary community as a whole. And they're actually the two gentlemen that Camp Kerry was named after. So the first person is named William Carey, who was born in England in 1761, and he's most commonly known as the father of modern missions. Now, while living in England, eventually he took on an apprenticeship under a blacksmith, where, through his time there, he eventually converted to Christianity. And while this is happening, there are also a few other things that we see unfolding in his story. After converting to Christianity, we also see that he has this growing interest in learning about foreign lands. And although, he couldn't read the best at the time, he still had this desire to read literature from foreign lands and just to pursue that. And then eventually that curiosity shifted to more of a spiritual concern. And he started to feel like there were lots of people in these foreign lands who were missing out on the word of God and the kingdom of God. And he wanted to go and share that with them and spread the kingdom of God, as they would say back then. Now, he did face a lot of opposition from peers at the time who tried to discourage him from doing this. But despite that, he eventually went on to become the first missionary from England to India. And while there, he did pursue his dream of spreading the gospel or bringing more people into the kingdom of God. And he also helped found the first degree awarding university in India, and I believe it's pronounced Sirapur University. If you'd like to learn more on that, you can find that online still, because it's still open and still operating today, which I also found very interesting. Now, the next gentleman, who was also a pioneer and who Camp Kerry was also named after, is an African-American named Carey, who was born in 1780 in Charles County, Virginia. And he pretty much lived on a plantation there up until he reached his 20s. Now, something he was able to experience that not many slaves during that time were able to was the fact that his family actually lived together, and this included his parents as well as his grandmother. And that was just something that really wasn't common for them. And they were a very religious family and very strict on Carey, just to, keep him good. And then we see later on in his story that once he reaches the age of 24, his slave master actually sent him to Richmond, Virginia, where he worked as hired slave labor in the Chaco tobacco warehouse, which was very interesting to me because when I learned about slavery in school, it was never portrayed as hired slave labor in warehouses, especially in the city that I grew up in. So that was very interesting to me. Now, while working at this warehouse, he did earn a wage that he was required to give to a slave owner. But during this time, again, there's still a few things that we see happening all at once for him. While working at this warehouse, he eventually converts to Christianity. And that's mainly because he's starting to feel this call that he can be better and do better. And with that, while this is happening, his hard work at the warehouse also gets recognized, and he got put into a supervisor position at this warehouse in Richmond, Virginia. Now, with that came an increase in the money that he was making, and that actually exceeded what he had to hand over to his slave master at the time. And this allowed him to be able to save money on the side. And eventually, in 1813, we see him purchase the freedom of himself and his family. Does anyone want to possibly guess how much that might have cost in that time period? Because I was able to find an exact number for that. I see we have someone said 500. Does anyone else want to guess too? Or if not, it's fine. Well, In that year, what I was able to uncover was that he actually paid $850 to be able to purchase their freedom, which for some of us in this day and age, that doesn't exactly cover rent. But back then, in 1813, that was a ton of money, for sure. And after gaining his freedom, he started to feel this call to preach. And he found out about people having desires to do missionary work in Africa. And he was on board with this. He felt that it would be a good opportunity, and he felt he would face less obstacles there than he would here in America, even though he was a free Black at the time. And with that, he became the first missionary from America to Africa. And while there, he helped found one of the first Baptist churches on the African continent. He also served as health inspector for what is now known as Liberia. And just backtracking a little, he helped found this colony that grew into what is now Liberia. But later on, um, during his time there, he was elected as vice agent. And then before the end of his life, he also served as governor of Liberia for a short period of time. And I just wanted to highlight these two pioneers because, without them, we might not have had the Women's Missionary Union or the Baptist General Convention, who were able to create these opportunities at Group Camp 7. And it's important to highlight these pioneers who we see this constant theme of redefining the status quo and really redefining the societal norms at that time to become trailblazers and ultimately create opportunities for people like myself in different spaces like what I'm involved in now. Now, after looking at Camp Kerry, the last camp that I was able to come across and found some information about was Camp Johnson. Now, this camp, as I stated earlier, has been a bit of a mystery for us, and I'll get into that in a moment. But Camp Johnson for Boys started out at the Rappahannock Industrial Academy in Ozinga, Virginia, and I hope I pronounced that right, back in 1946. And when this camp opened, it was for boys between the ages of 10 and 20 years old. And basically what this camp looked to do was to develop leadership skills within these young boys and just to cater to the life needs that they had at, different developmental stages in life. And now in order for a young boy to gain acceptance into Camp Johnson, of course, there was an $8 fee that was associated with the week-long session when they first opened, but they actually had to go to the pastor of the churches that they would attend to get a letter of recommendation, which I found really interesting. And it kind of made me think about, the character of some of these kids, because we know for those of us who grew up in church or were involved with church, that, the environment that the church creates, you imagine people being really well behaved, really well mannered, and very respectful in that aspect. But in addition to getting that letter of recommendation from their pastor, they also had to get a health certificate, likely to just verify that all their vaccinations or medical records were up to date, just for the safety of others at the camp. Now, again, Camp Johnson has been our mystery camp because we saw it had that start in the Rappahannock area or Rappahannock Industrial Academy. But when researching it, we started to look at more newspapers from the 1950s. And these are just two of a few we've been able to find. And if I could bring your attention to the one on the left, this is from their 5th season. And if you look at that second paragraph where the words look a little bolded, you can see that they talk about how the camping project was located on Route 655 in Chesterfield County. So for me, when I initially saw that during our research, I definitely got very excited because it's like, oh, it could have been a Group Camp 7. Like now we're starting to get a little bit closer. And then if I could have you guys look at this ad on the right here from New Journal and Guide, you can see that there's another reference in there to Chesterfield, Virginia at the Swift Creek area. So again, we haven't found anything that directly says it was at the Group Camp 7 site, but with things like this popping up in these newspaper articles, one could really argue that it could have been at the Group Camp 7 site. But we're still digging deeper into this story and still learning more. And if any of you know anything or might know someone who might know anything, definitely feel free to, share that with us at the end of the presentation. And maybe one of you can help myself and a few others learn something new about this story. Now, when boys came out to Camp Johnson, in the last article, if you had a chance to read through that, it stated that while at the camp, the boys participated in worship as well as recreation. And then in this ad here, we have a list of activities that they would do. And just to name a few things, they had archery, they would do boxing, which actually surprised me. They would have parties there, they would sing and go on hikes. And I don't know about some of you, but if I'm a kid and I had an opportunity to attend a camp like that with those activities, I think I'd be pretty excited to dig into that and just, try to do as much as I could. But that was a bit of what we've been able to uncover about Camp Johnson, and just some fun facts about Camp Johnson. The inspiration for this camp actually came from Camp Kerry. The Baptist General Convention, who was the Black Christian group involved with Camp Kerry, and the Baptist General Association, which is the Black Christian group that sponsored Camp Johnson. They were both based out of Virginia Union University, which, for those who aren't aware, is a historically Black university in the heart of Richmond, not far from downtown. And, because of that, they had this connection and they were paying attention to what each was doing. So I found that it was very interesting that Camp Kerry actually inspired Camp Johnson and some of the later projects that they would go on to do. Now, with that, when looking at Camp Johnson, there were also a few pioneers involved with this story that were pointed out to me from Virginia Union, and I constantly saw their names referenced when I read through books that covered, the story of Group Camp 7 and, Camp Kerry's involvement there. And the first gentleman that I came across and Virginia Union pointed out to me was Mr. Oscar A. Morton, who, when Camp Johnson first opened, he actually served as the camp director. And prior to that, he was also a principal at Moore Street School here in Richmond. Now, I haven't been able to find a ton of information on him, and I'm still looking to do that, but he was the first camp director that we see involved with Camp Johnson prior to it moving out to the Chesterfield area. This next gentleman is who the camp was actually named after, and he actually served as the president of the Baptist General Association, who named the camp after him just to pay some honor and some respect to their president. But when looking at Harvey N. Johnson's story, I saw that he was born in Richmond in the Jackson Ward area in 1882, and his father during that time was actually a very successful carpenter in the Richmond area. Now, as Mr. Johnson got older, he eventually started attending school at Virginia Union University. And then after attending school there, he went on to the Carnegie Institute of Technology. It's actually located in Pittsburgh, basically to finish up his school there. And he would basically work as a carpenter, during the day and do classes at night, just to be able to support himself. Now, after school, he came back to Virginia, but instead of going back to Richmond in that Jackson Ward area, he went down to the Norfolk area, where he was able to accomplish quite a few things that I thought were really interesting about his story. When he came back to Norfolk, he opened up an architecture firm that primarily catered to the Black community in the Norfolk area. So this means that he was down there designing homes for locals in the communities, as well as local churches in the Norfolk area that are still in existence today, and they still are used today. They still host church services. And in addition to that, he also designed a theater that's called the Attucks Theater that's in Norfolk, and that's spelled ATTUCKS, Attucks Theater. And that's also still in use today in the Norfolk area for different events that they host. And, if you're familiar with the Norfolk area and you'd like to check that out, I would definitely recommend it. And then one more thing that I found really interesting about his story was that he actually helped found the Norfolk branch of Virginia Union University. I'm sorry, the Norfolk branch of Virginia Union University, which isn't known as that today, but the school is still there. And does anyone want to guess what school that might be? Norfolk, Virginia?
Norfolk State.
Yep, yep, it is Norfolk State University.
Yeah.
And for me, that was
Yes.
very exciting because I'm currently a senior at Old Dominion, and Norfolk State is right down the road from me.
Yes.
And it's been amazing to be able to tell these stories and make my own personal connections. But overall, that kind of concludes the information, or what we've been able to uncover on Group Camp 7 and some of those organizations involved through our research. And before I end the presentation, I just want to take a moment to paint a bigger picture for everyone here. When we're diving into these stories and bringing attention to these organizations and pioneers, there's that question of, why is this important? Why do people need to know about this? And I mean, for starters, it's very important to highlight these stories of these people who really are going against what is known as normal at that time. Prior to doing this project and helping with this research, I never knew about those interracial partnerships that were going on. I never knew about these organizations that were creating these opportunities for young Black girls in Virginia. And ultimately, all these people helped pave the way for future generations. And again, people like myself to be able to access these areas and recreate. And without, some of the newspapers and some of the universities who kept record of this, we would never know this history. And then as far as why it's very important to the park to tell these stories is this. Oftentimes parks have multiple stories, and not all stories are fully told in its entirety. And for some people on the outside looking in, when you have only certain stories told, some parks can appear exclusive to someone who might not know a lot about parks. And that can discourage people from wanting to participate. But when you tell these stories like this and you give people something to connect with, something to resonate with, that can definitely help bring a more diverse group into parks and just have people feel more of a connection. And for me personally, that's something I've been able to feel and experience through my research, because my grandmother attended Virginia Union and graduated from there. I told you guys I'm a senior at ODU, and I'm down there by Norfolk State. And then even some of the churches I learned about through my research, they were actually family churches on my dad's side, prior to me being born, of course. But if I'm able to feel this and experience this, then I know others can too, for sure. And moving forward, I think we should continue to definitely tell these types of stories for those purposes. But I just like to thank all of you again for taking some time out of your Saturday just to learn about what I've been able to uncover with Group Camp 7 so far. And I just really quickly would like to show my references page so everyone can see that.
Kalen?
Yes.
Interject just for a minute. I would, on behalf of the Friends of Pocahontas, I would just like to say how proud we are of the AmeriCorps program at Pocahontas. You really do us good things. You, Bobby, and everybody else. We look for more good things here. What Chief Ranger Haskins and Whalen do to enhance the visitor experience, and you're part of that team. Also want to acknowledge Ethan here. There's one gentleman that's joined us a little bit later that I didn't recognize. I'm going to ask Eric Hoagland if he'd care to say a words. He's with the state park system and has been a strong advocate of the programs that we've had at Pocahontas. Eric, would you like to say anything?
Gosh, Owen, you're putting me on the spot here. I wasn't ready for that, but no, I was happy to join in when Nate, the park manager, shared the invitation, and I was just typing in the chat, but I'll go ahead and share it. That what great information and a great conclusion that Kalen shared of how these stories help everyone feel included in what we're doing in Virginia State Parks and those history connections for everyone that make our spaces welcoming for all Virginians, anyone that wants to visit. So great job, Kalen, and really glad to join in and see it this morning.
Thank you, everyone. And before we move on to any questions you may have, I just want to give a special thank you to the New Journal and Guide, the Richmond Times-Dispatch, and Virginia Union University, just because they've been a huge help in telling this story, and a lot of what we've been able to learn about Group Camp 7 has been preserved in a lot of their articles and special archives, and without them, we may not have been able to tell as much about this story as we have. And I'd also like to thank Bobby, Todd, and Ethan House, both for your help in helping research Group Camp 7 and just helping me out with planning logistical stuff and just being on board to help tell these kinds of stories. But with that being said, if any of you know anything else about Group Camp 7, if you happen to meet someone who might have been there or might know more, might have pictures, definitely feel free to email me. My email is right here at the bottom. And hopefully we can be able to tell more about this story. But I'd like to open the floor up to you guys and see what questions you all have.
Mr. Gilliam,
Yes.
my name is Ernestine Wilson. Actually, I was a camper at Camp Kerry from 1956, probably through 62 or 63.
Mm-hmm.
They were some of the best years of my life. My time spent at Camp Kerry was, and I can tell you from personal experience that Mrs. Lena Smith changed my life. And not only mine, but the lives of many young ladies who attended this camp. I have friends today from as far northwest as Alexandria, from as far from far north as Alexandria, from as far, let's say, southwest to Pulaski, who attended the camp with me. And I just want to thank you. This has been, I'm sorry I was in a little late. I have a tea that I have to attend in a few minutes. I'm going to be checking out. But this is most inspirational. And also, I would like to speak with you about perhaps once the pandemic is over, sharing this information with some other very important folk. I'm glad to see everyone who is here today, and just hope that we will continue to share these kinds of very good messages across the Commonwealth and beyond. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you.
Well, thank you. And thank you for joining us and being able to share a little bit about your experiences there. And I would love to sit down and talk with you and be able to tell this story a bit more. So
I do have some pictures, by the way.
Okay, yes, we really would like to have those, but thanks again so much.
You're quite welcome.
Well, I want to say just thank you, Kalen, when you contacted me about the, can you hear me? Am I on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. When you contacted me, I was very excited because I think telling the history of African Americans is something that is so sorely needed. And to see a young person as yourself, and I'm so happy to know you're right down the road from me. I'd really like, and we will be contacting you perhaps to share your story, what you've done with our readers, so that you can continue the work that you're doing. And I wish you well. Expect to hear from us. Thank you. And thank you. I took a few notes. Never heard of Lena Smith, but she sounds like she was certainly a tremendous historical figure for us to remember. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll be looking out for an email from you.
Oh, you'll get it.
This is Eric Hoagland again, and I also did want to recognize that one of our DCR department deputy directors, Nathan Burrell, is also on the call, and I know interested in what Kalen had to share. So appreciate Nathan being with us today.
Sorry, it's taking me a second to unmute. Yes, and as I spoke earlier on, you know, Kalen, wow. Yeah, for Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, we really are focusing on retelling and recasting the stories of the land. And this is truly an important step. And as we look to expand this effort to other parks, other facilities that we manage across the Commonwealth, this methodology that you've employed is going to become key. Because it's important that we not only recognize the importance of these spaces, but really work to change the narrative that African Americans or people of color in general don't recreate and don't use spaces like this. And this is the story that we're working to recraft, really telling the stories of the land. And so I applaud, again, all the work of the staff at Pocahontas State Park, the support of friends of Pocahontas State Park, and just the community in general, because again, reconnecting the community to these spaces is a critically important piece of the work that we at DCR are doing. So I applaud all of you. Thank you for taking time out of your busy Saturday morning, especially on this beautiful day, to be a part of this important work.
And Kalen, it's Rob. I want to hold up the power of young folks in this conversation, right? Because I think it's really important. On the one hand, we're hearing the interracial sort of connection of making resources available, but you're young, first of all, and second of all, these are experiences that young people had. We just heard somebody who said that they went to camp for a few summers, and those were the most important years of their life, right? And so and I think the other piece is that was an experience that fit these young folks' lives at that time, right? How do we continue these stories of the land and continue to make opportunities available to Black and Brown young folks these days that fit their lives now, right? It may look exactly the same, it may not look exactly the same. That's kind of the wonder of, I mean, we're groundwork, and so we're sort of right at the nexus of ecological and environmental justice and young folks, but there's always this emphasis on allowing young people to find and tell story and create agency for themselves. And so, number one, hats off to you for having done that. But number two, for me, I'm wondering how do we, because, I mean, I heard the camps are going up until about 66. Then what? Right? I mean, there's a piece happening in here around the narrative that Black folks don't recreate, kind of taking root and coming into the lives of Black folk as well. It's not just an external dialogue. Anyhow, there's a lot here, and just you've done so well. The only other thing that I'd highlight is when we talk about Black history, how important it is to have real conversations about the lives of enslaved folk, right? Because we tend to go, oh, it was slavery, right? And nobody did anything. And that's just not the case. And so anyhow, I'm very moved by what you've done, and thank you for sharing.
Well, I'm so glad you could join. I'm very grateful and thankful for all the support behind, the things that I've been able to share with everyone. And I really love the fact that I have all these people who are truly interested in, learning about this story, and to see that people actually care about, what I'm doing and just this history in general. It's just been an honor, truly.
Hey, Kayla, I'm going to butt in. If anyone knows Pocahontas, I am currently being surrounded by really hectic mountain bikers. So I just want to hop in and say thanks everyone for coming. My name is Haley Haskins. I'm the Chief Ranger here at Pocahontas. I have had the extremely easy task of being Kalen's supervisor during his internship. And I'll try not to get emotional as I am about all the work he's done, but extremely great work, Kalen. Really proud of you. Hope to see you. Kalen's internship ends in a week. So this is like, for me, but
Yeah.
I hope we get Kalen into DCR. He's a huge asset, as so many folks have echoed. So I just want to say how proud of you I am.
Thank you. Thank you.
Could I respond to Rob's comment? I think you're absolutely on target about the need for conversations to come as a result of the kind of information and research that has been done so well here, because it really helps us to understand what happened with that generation and where we are today in the 21st century. Where did the disconnect happen? That resources, safety nets, that was a safety net, as that lady, I don't see her name now, maybe she's gone, but that was a safety net that provided protection, it provided leadership ability, skills, and so forth. And somehow in the 60s, when we began to lose some of those safety nets, we have seen a different kind of generational emphasis on other things than swimming and some of the other positive recreational activities that were offered. So I couldn't agree with you more. Rob, where are you?
I'm Ernestine Wilson. I'm still here.
Okay, well,
I'm
yes.
the lady you were speaking with, and I would be happy to be a part of that conversation, so I can shed some light. I'm 75, by the way, so I can shed a lot of light on what happened. My grandchildren, two of them at least, attend 4-H camps, but 4-H camps are wonderful, but they're not what I got at Camp Kerry. They're not what my brother got at H.N. Johnson. Okay,
Right.
so I'd be happy to be a part. And some of what happened is good, and some of what happened is definitely not good. Okay, as I said, I've got to tick out right now because I've got something to do at 11. But please keep in touch. I will keep in touch. Kalen, I wrote your name down. I don't have your contact information, but I think I can get it from Ethan. And I will be more than happy to share with a continuation of this conversation.
Well,
And
let's keep Kalen as our contact person.
yes,
And see if we can't do something along this line.
yes.
Kalen, you're clear, right? You've just been given a job. You got it?
Another
Yeah.
job.
Okay, another job. Ms. Anderson, we're in Richmond.
Okay.
And we're groundwork RVA, and so we're about young folks and outside, but we're often skills based. Kalen has done amazing work with us as well earlier prior to getting to DCR. But it is a conversation, and I think that the piece, and I'm sorry, I don't have names because I'm on my phone. The distinction between, and I'm sorry, but things that are by and for the folk who are using them versus things that are offered to us is a really important distinction.
Yes.
And how we navigate that in the 21st century, I think that there's been so much in the intervening time of here you can have this, but you can't have that. You can say these things, so it's a complex conversation. But I think that what Kalen's done in terms of lifting this up from that position of this is what it looks like when people are able to build things for themselves is really, really important. And it's what we're about, and absolutely want to be part of any conversation that continues.
So we do have some information about what was happening during the 1970s at Group Camp 7. Richmond Parks and Rec was actually bringing young children down to recreate and go on hikes and things like that. At that time, the buildings were in disarray for the most part. They had not been kept up. So we do have some information of folks being able to come down and use that site, but not a lot. And I just want to say thank you, Kalen. Thank you for everyone. It was my pleasure to meet Miss Wilson finally. I've talked to her on the phone for a while, and I got in contact with her from a professor of mine at University of Richmond, and I cried when I first found her when she emailed me. I was like, oh my God, I'm so excited for this. But I got to head out. I'm actually getting my first vaccine now. So thank you again for everyone. Kalen, awesome job.
Thank you.
All right, take care, everyone.
Hey, Kalen.
Yeah.
I just put something in the chat, and Ethan, I can share this with you later as well. I know I talked to you guys at the last, and Ethan, good Lord, go get your shot, man. Go get your shot. But Ethan is my brother. He lives with my mother, and we were getting our shots. Anyway, I just wanted to share with you. So the Sophia Smith collection, I know it looks like Sophia, it's pronounced Sophia. It's Smith College has the YWCA papers. I think I had mentioned that to you guys at the last talk that you gave. There are some research fellowships that are available for folks who are not necessarily connected with that university or with that college. So the website that I sent you has a couple of those fellowships that you guys might be interested in. I don't think that they're huge, but just in terms of the ability to travel to those archives and do some of this research. Some of the YWCA papers have been digitized, but I've been having a hard time sort of navigating those digital papers. So in terms of opportunities to kind of continue to explore the YWCA's presence, particularly in the 30s and 40s, that may be a really nice option for you guys. And they got a little radical there, particularly in terms of race. Most of my work with that organization was in the 20s, or I'm sorry, in the early 20th century, and they weren't particularly radical. But as we got into sort of the later 20s and the 30s, they did start to get much more invested in labor movements and in interracial activities that actually were bringing people together, similar to what you guys were talking about today, and similar to what you're finding in your research. So I just wanted to share that with you, and I can always share it with Ethan as well, if that's something that you guys are interested in, or that, your future, wherever it takes you, Kalen, allows you the opportunity to continue to explore that more.
Yeah, I definitely would love to continue on and help tell this story more as we find out more. And thank you for that resource too. We also, a few weeks ago, I reached out to the YWCA, and they also sent some more electronic files, but it's a huge amount. Ethan has been able to, put some time to the side to go through some of these files, and he's been telling me he's been finding some interesting connections. But I'm just glad that we're starting to get more resources, and I'm really excited for, where we could take this. But thank you again for that, and I'll make sure I take that link right now. Also, I'm just going to place my email in the chat again for those who don't have it, but might like to stay in contact with me just to have it.
And thank you so much for doing this work. I mean, I think this was well echoed in the audience, but it's really, really exciting to learn about, and it's really exciting to see. You guys are doing great.
And also, I just want to let you guys know really, really briefly how I got involved with this Group Camp 7 project. I'm actually a conservation intern at Pocahontas State Park, and I'm doing this as part of my coursework to receive my degree in Parks and Rec Management from Old Dominion University. And one of the guidelines for my internship was that I had to pretty much do a project that would be beneficial to the agency. And at the start of my internship, I was given a list of different things, and I saw Group Camp 7, and I knew I had been to Pocahontas many times before, but I had never knew of this site. And as soon as I saw that, I just immediately just wanted to kind of jump on that and tell this story. But if no one else has any other questions, I know a lot of you are busy. We'll go ahead and end the meeting here unless anyone else would like to share anything, or if any of you have any other questions. Well, seems like you don't, but thanks again for joining me today, and I look forward to continuing to talk to some of you and sharing more information.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. You guys go enjoy the weather, enjoy the nice Saturday.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ethan. That was great.
Guard work up
Bye.
ahead.
Have a great day, everybody.
Bye-bye.
All right.